The first thing I noticed was not the court seal or the thick block of legal language across the top of the notice. It was our company name sitting in the middle of a bankruptcy filing like it belonged there, like Everline Freight had always been part of a private financial disaster I knew nothing about. My name is Felicia Andrade, though most people at work call me Felix because that was what my father called me when I was little, and the nickname followed me into adulthood. I stood in the mailroom with a stack of invoices under one arm, reading the same paragraph 3 times, trying to understand why a bankruptcy court in Delaware was notifying our logistics company that we were listed as a creditor in my business partner's personal case. Then I saw the creditor schedule attached behind it, and one name stood out above every bank, credit card, and vendor. A company called Harbor Point Recovery LLC was listed as the largest secured creditor, claiming it was owed a substantial loan by my partner Bennett. The amount was large enough to swallow his half of our business, large enough to trigger a court-supervised sale, large enough, if nobody questioned it, to let someone buy his ownership stake for almost nothing. I was 42 years old when I found out that the woman I had trusted with half of my company had staged a personal bankruptcy filing to force the sale of her ownership stake at a steep discount. Bennett Marlowe was not broke in the ordinary sense. She had not been blindsided by medical debt, or a failed investment, or some private emergency she was too proud to discuss. She had built a fake financial crisis around a shell company she secretly controlled, and she had done it so she could buy her own half of our company back through another door, then use the leverage from that process to box me out of the company we had spent 9 years building together. That is the clean version. The version I can say now, after lawyers, accountants, hearings, and months of sickening clarity. At the beginning, it was only a notice in the mail and a feeling in my stomach that something was deeply wrong. Everline Freight started in a rented office behind a tire shop outside Columbus, Ohio. We moved regional commercial shipments for mid-sized manufacturers that were too big for casual trucking brokers and too small to get priority from the national freight giants. I had come from operations. I knew dispatch, carrier compliance, route planning, and the ugly mathematics of late deliveries. Bennett had come from sales and finance. She could sit across from a plant manager and make him feel as if she had already solved the problem before he finished explaining it. For years, that combination worked. I handled the systems and service side. Bennett brought in clients, negotiated contracts, and watched cash flow like a hawk. We each owned 50%. We each signed the bank papers. We each knew, or I thought we knew, that neither of us could move the company without the other. By our 7th year, we had real offices, 43 employees, a carrier network that reached across 6 states, and a reputation for solving complicated short-haul freight problems without drama. By our 9th year, we were finally seeing the kind of profit that made people use words like valuation and acquisition interest. A packaging manufacturer had signed a 3-year contract with us. A regional appliance distributor was expanding its account. Our last quarter had been the strongest in company history. That should have been a proud season. Instead, it became the season Bennett and I started arguing behind closed doors. The conflict was about expansion, at least on paper. Bennett wanted to open a second office in Indianapolis and hire a larger sales team before competitors moved into the niche we had created. I wanted to slow down, strengthen our technology, and protect service quality before adding fixed costs. Our arguments were not screaming matches. They were worse in some ways because they were polished and controlled. Bennett would slide a projection across the table and say, "Felicia, caution is not a strategy." I would tap the service failure reports and say, "Growth that breaks the operation is not growth. It is debt with better branding." We both had points. We both had pride. But I still believed we were arguing because we cared about the company. Looking back, I can see the signs that Bennett had moved from disagreement into something darker. She began asking for copies of documents she already had access to. She wanted updated operating agreements, current customer contracts, and the latest internal valuation we had prepared for insurance purposes. She made vague comments about personal financial pressure, but never enough for me to understand the shape of it. Once, after a tense meeting about hiring, she leaned in the doorway of my office and said, "If one person can't make a final decision here, we are going to miss our window." I thought she was pushing me to compromise. I did not realize she was already designing a way to make me irrelevant. The bankruptcy notice arrived on a Tuesday in late April. Our office manager, Janelle, brought it in with a confused look on her face. "This came certified," she said. "It names us, but it looks personal." She handed it to me because legal mail always came to either Bennett or me. Bennett was out that morning, supposedly visiting a client in Dayton. I opened the envelope in the mailroom because I assumed it was some vendor dispute or maybe a mistake. Within 5 minutes, I was sitting at the conference table with the notice spread out in front of me, my coffee untouched beside it. Bennett had filed for personal bankruptcy. Everline Freight was listed as a creditor. Harbor Point Recovery LLC was listed as her largest creditor, claiming a loan secured by assets that included her membership interest in our company. The filing suggested that Bennett's ownership stake might be sold through the bankruptcy process to satisfy creditor claims. At first, I told myself I was misunderstanding it. Bankruptcy law is not common language. Maybe it was a protective filing. Maybe the company was listed because of a guarantee or reimbursement issue. Maybe Bennett had been embarrassed and planned to tell me once the first hearing was scheduled. I tried to give her the benefit of every possible explanation. Then I reached the exhibits. The loan document attached to the filing was only 4 months old. Harbor Point Recovery had supposedly loaned Bennett enough money to create a personal debt so large it could justify liquidation of assets. The agreement was strangely thin for such a serious transaction. There was no ordinary lender background, no history of business activity, no practical explanation for why a little-known LLC would hand a huge sum to Bennett personally. The address listed for Harbor Point was a registered agent office in Delaware. The signature was from a manager I had never heard of, a man named Calvin Reese. I called Bennett. She did not answer. I texted. I received a bankruptcy notice naming Everline. Call me now, she replied 20 minutes later. In meetings, I will explain later. Not I am sorry you found out this way. Not please don't panic. Just I will explain later. That was when the fear turned into suspicion. I closed my office door and called a business litigation attorney named Priscilla Nakamura. I knew her through a client who had used her during an ownership dispute. Priscilla had a calm voice that made panic feel embarrassing, which was useful because I was very close to panic when she answered. I told her what I had received. She asked me to scan every page. I sent the documents while she stayed on the phone. For a few minutes, all I heard was her keyboard and the low hum of our office air conditioner. Then she said, "Felicia, I need you to listen carefully. I am not saying this is fraudulent yet, but the structure is not normal. If her largest creditor can influence the bankruptcy process, and if that creditor is connected to her, there may be an attempt to manufacture a sale. We need to know who owns Harbor Point." Quickly, I asked her whether Bennett could really sell her half of our company without me agreeing. Bankruptcy changes leverage, Priscilla said. It does not erase your rights, but it can put pressure on them. If the court believes the debtor has legitimate creditors and assets need to be sold, the process can move faster than a private buyout negotiation. A discounted sale is possible, especially if no one objects with evidence. The phrase "with evidence" landed hard. Suspicion was useless unless I could prove something. Priscilla recommended a forensic accountant named Cornelius Achaby. She said he was slow to speak, irritatingly precise, and very good at following ownership trails through entities designed to hide them. I called him that afternoon. He asked for the bankruptcy filing, our operating agreement, any correspondence from Bennett about valuation or expansion, and all public information I could find on Harbor Point. By dinner time, I had sent him a folder of documents and told my husband, Raphael, that I might be dealing with the worst betrayal of my professional life. Raphael listened at our kitchen table while our teenage daughter did homework upstairs. He knew Bennett. She had been to our house for barbecues. She had given my daughter a graduation necklace when she finished middle school. Raphael read the first page of the notice, then looked up and said, "Do you think she is really in trouble?" I wanted to say yes because that answer hurt less. A partner in trouble was a problem. A partner creating a fake problem to hurt me was something else entirely. "I don't know," I said. "But the timing is too perfect. Our valuation goes up, we fight about control, and suddenly her half might be sold through court for a discount." Raphael set the paper down. "Then don't confront her alone, and don't let her make you feel petty for asking questions." That advice became important because Bennett returned the next morning with a performance ready. She came into my office at 8:15 wearing the gray blazer she used for lender meetings and closed the door behind her. "I know you got the notice," she said. I waited. She sighed as if she were the one carrying the burden of my reaction. "I was going to tell you. Some personal investments went badly. I have been trying to manage it quietly. It does not have to affect Everline. The filing says your ownership interest may be sold," I said. "That's standard language." "Is Harbor Point Recovery a standard creditor?" Her expression did not change, but her left hand tightened around the back of the chair in front of my desk. "They are a private lender. Why would a private lender give you that kind of money 4 months ago?" "Felicia, I am not going to unpack my personal finances in the middle of a workday. You named our company in a bankruptcy filing. That made it a workday issue." For the first time, irritation broke through her calm. "I am handling it. You do not need to make it adversarial." That sentence told me more than any confession could have. People who are genuinely drowning do not usually accuse you of making the water adversarial. I told her I had retained counsel. She stared at me for a long second. then gave a small nod. "Of course you did," she said, as if I had failed some private test. She left without answering another question. From that day forward, the office became a stage. Bennett and I continued attending management meetings because nothing had been proven, and the company still had freight to move. Dispatchers still needed approvals. Clients still needed rate quotes. Payroll still had to run. Bennett sat across from me in conference rooms and discussed quarterly goals with the same composed voice she had always used. Sometimes she would look directly at me while describing sales expansion plans, and I would wonder whether she was imagining herself sitting in my chair a month later, the company finally under her control. The hardest meeting happened 9 days after the notice. We were reviewing projections with our controller, a careful woman named Marta Ellis. Bennett clicked through a presentation showing revenue growth under her proposed Indianapolis office plan. She spoke about capacity, lead conversion, and market share. Her tone was bright, almost energized. I sat there with a legal pad in front of me, writing down questions I could not ask in the room. Who is Calvin Rees? Why Delaware? Where did the loan money go? Did you think I would just watch the court sell the company we built? At one point, Bennett said, "The next fiscal quarter will determine who we are for the next 5 years. We cannot be sentimental." Marta laughed lightly because she thought Bennett was talking about expansion. I did not laugh. Bennett's eyes flicked toward me, and for 1 second I saw it. Not guilt exactly, but calculation. She knew I knew something. She did not know how much. Cornelius worked for 3 weeks. He warned me after the first call that shell structures are usually boring until they are not. Harbor Point Recovery had been formed in Delaware 8 months earlier. Its listed manager, Calvin Rees, appeared on several small LLC filings, but had no meaningful business footprint. The registered office was shared by hundreds of entities. On paper, Harbor Point was owned by another LLC in Nevada. That Nevada LLC was owned by a family trust. The trust had a trustee named Daniel Voss. When Cornelius said the name Daniel Voss, I had to sit down. Daniel was Bennett's brother-in-law. Her younger sister, Marin, had married him 6 years earlier. I had met him at Bennett's holiday party. He was a quiet man who owned 2 gyms and always looked slightly bored when business people talked about business. There was no innocent reason for his name to be sitting at the end of the ownership trail behind Bennett's largest bankruptcy creditor. Cornelius did not stop there. Public filings were useful, but Priscilla needed more than a family connection. Through lawful records, subpoena preparation, and banking information obtained once the dispute began formally moving, Cornelius traced the only substantial transaction Harbor Point had ever made. 4 months before Bennett's bankruptcy filing, Harbor Point transferred the exact loan amount listed in the bankruptcy schedule into Bennett's personal account. Before that transfer, Harbor Point's account had been funded by an account associated with the Voss Trust. After that, there was almost no activity except legal fees and administrative charges. In plain English, Bennett had arranged for a shell entity connected to her family to lend her money, listed that entity as her largest creditor, then used that debt to create the appearance of insolvency. Because the debt was secured against her ownership interest in Everline, Harbor Point could position itself to acquire that interest through a bankruptcy sale. If the court approved a quick sale at a distressed valuation, Harbor Point could buy Bennett's half cheaply. Since Harbor Point traced back to Bennett's own circle, Bennett could end up controlling what she had pretended to lose. I asked Cornelius the question that had been sitting behind all the others. Was the plan to get her half back, or to get mine too? He paused. Cornelius never speculated casually. "The documents only show the mechanism for her half," he said. "But if a related entity acquired her stake through bankruptcy, it could create pressure on you. Depending on your operating agreement, they might challenge deadlock provisions, force valuation disputes, or make operating conditions difficult enough that you would consider selling. The first move is clear. The later objective is an inference." It was a careful answer, but I understood it. Bennett had not necessarily built a trap that automatically stole my half. She had built a machine that would give her leverage while pretending she was only a debtor subject to court process. She could shrug and say, "It is out of my hands," while a company she secretly controlled took control of half of Everline at a discount. The emotional part of me wanted to storm into her office and throw the documents across her desk. The practical part knew that would only help her prepare. Priscilla was firm. "No confrontation until we have the objection drafted. No accusations in email. No hallway conversations. Keep company operations steady. If she asks what you are doing, say counsel is reviewing the filing. Nothing more." So I did the strangest thing I have ever done in business. I kept working beside the person trying to undermine me. Every day became an exercise in restraint. Bennett would ask about a client call, and I would answer. She would request a report, and I would provide what she was entitled to receive. She would make comments about the bankruptcy being personally humiliating, and I would say, "My attorney is reviewing it." Once she came into my office after hours and closed the door. "We used to talk before lawyers," she said. I looked up from a carrier compliance report. "We used to tell each other the truth before court notices." Her mouth tightened. "You are assuming things you do not understand. Then explain Harbor Point." She did not answer. She looked toward the window where the parking lot lights were just coming on. "You have always thought operations made this company," she said quietly. "You never understood that I was the one pulling opportunity through the door." I felt the old argument rising between us, but under it was something more personal. Resentment. Scorekeeping. Years of partnership curdled into a belief that one of us deserved the company more. "Bennett," I said. "If you wanted a buyout, you could have asked." She laughed once without humor. "And spent 2 years paying lawyers while you insisted on conservative numbers?" "No, we both know how that would have gone." That was almost an admission, but almost was not enough. I ended the conversation and called Priscilla immediately after Bennett left. The formal confrontation happened in Priscilla's conference room on a rainy Thursday morning. Bennett arrived with her bankruptcy attorney, a man named Alden Price, and a business counsel I had never met. She looked composed, but there was a stiffness around her eyes. Priscilla sat beside me with a binder in front of her. Cornelius joined by video, his face expressionless behind square glasses. Priscilla began calmly. "We are here to discuss the bankruptcy filing, the listed creditor Harbor Point Recovery LLC, and the intended sale process involving Ms. Marlowe's membership interest in Everline Freight." Alden Price held up a hand. "My client has made a lawful filing. If Ms. Andrade has concerns, she can raise them through the proper court channels. We intend to," Priscilla said. "Before we do, we want to give your client an opportunity to explain several facts." She opened the binder. Page by page, she laid out the trail. Harbor Point's formation, the Nevada LLC, the Voss Trust, Daniel Voss as trustee, the transfer into Bennett's personal account, the timing of the loan, the security interest in Bennett's Everline stake, the lack of normal lending history, the proposed sale path. Bennett's attorney started objecting to phrasing, but Priscilla did not raise her voice. She simply kept placing documents on the table like stones. Cornelius answered technical questions with maddening precision. Yes, the entities were legally formed. No, there was no evidence Harbor Point had made other commercial loans. Yes, the loan amount matched the scheduled debt. Yes, Daniel Voss was connected by marriage to Bennett. Yes, the transaction occurred 4 months before the filing and after Bennett had requested updated valuation materials from Everline. Finally, Priscilla turned to Bennett. "Did you disclose to the bankruptcy court that your largest creditor is connected to a trust controlled by your brother-in-law?" Bennett looked at her attorneys. Neither of them spoke. Priscilla asked again, "Did you disclose that relationship?" Bennett's face had gone pale, but her voice stayed low and steady. "No." The room seemed to shrink around that single word. I asked, before Priscilla could stop me, "Why?" Bennett looked at me then. For the first time in weeks, she did not look strategic. She looked angry and exhausted. "Because you were going to freeze us in place until the market passed us by. Because every major decision became a tug of war. Because I knew one of us would eventually need full control, and you were never going to agree to terms that reflected what I brought to this company. So you faked being bankrupt? I created leverage," she said. Priscilla's pen stopped moving. Bennett heard herself then. I saw it in her expression. But pride pushed her forward. "You make it sound criminal. I had debt. The filing was real. The process exists for a reason." Cornelius spoke from the screen. "Debt manufactured for the purpose of manipulating a court-supervised sale is not the same thing as ordinary insolvency." Bennett's attorney told him not to characterize legal conclusions. Cornelius nodded once and said nothing else. I remember the rain tapping against the window. I remember Bennett's hands folded on the table. I remember realizing that she was not going to apologize because in her mind, apology would mean admitting she had done more than play hard. She had convinced herself that betrayal was just efficiency with sharper edges. Priscilla filed the objection the next morning. It was not dramatic in the way television makes legal filings dramatic. It was organized, supported, and cold. The objection argued that Bennett's bankruptcy petition had been filed in bad faith, and that the proposed treatment of her Everline ownership interest was part of a scheme to manipulate the court-supervised sale process. It attached Cornelius's ownership tracing, entity records, the transaction timeline, and excerpts from our operating documents showing why a distress transfer could harm both the company and me as the remaining member. Once the objection was filed, Bennett stopped pretending at work. She still came in, but she avoided unnecessary conversation. Her sales updates became shorter. She delegated client calls she normally would have taken herself. Employees sensed something was wrong, though we could not give them details. Marta asked me one afternoon, "Is Everline in danger?" I hated that question because it was the one I had been asking myself in private. "The company is operating," I told her. "Payroll is stable. Clients are being served. I will tell the team what I can when I can." That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that a company can be financially healthy and still be endangered by the people who own it. Everline's trucks were moving, invoices were being paid, and customers were happy, while the ownership structure underneath all of it was being dragged through a legal fire. The bankruptcy hearing took place 6 weeks after the first notice arrived. I had never been in bankruptcy court before. I expected something grander, but the room was practical, almost plain. Cases moved quickly. Lawyers spoke in formal shorthand. People's financial disasters were discussed in calm voices under fluorescent lights. When Bennett's case was called, Priscilla stood for Everline and for me as an interested party. Bennett sat at the other table with her attorneys, wearing a navy suit and no jewelry except a watch I recognized because I had given it to her after we landed our first 7-figure annual contract. That detail bothered me more than it should have. Priscilla did not accuse Bennett with emotion. She walked the judge through the timeline. Strong quarter, dispute over expansion, requests for valuation documents, formation and funding of Harbor Point. Loan to Bennett, bankruptcy filing, proposed sale path. Related party ownership trail. Failure to disclose the relationship clearly. Bennett's attorney argued that the debt existed, that the entities were separate legal persons, and that personal bankruptcy should not be converted into a business feud. He said my objection was really an attempt to control Bennett's lawful right to manage her debts. The judge listened, asked pointed questions, and kept returning to the same issue. Why had the relationship between the largest creditor and the debtor's family not been plainly disclosed? Why was the creditor's business history so limited? Why had the loan been made so close to the filing? Why did the collateral structure target the business interest at the center of an ownership dispute? At one point, the judge asked Bennett directly, "Miss Marlowe, did you understand that Harbor Point Recovery's potential acquisition of your membership interest could result in that interest returning to the influence of persons connected to you?" Bennett hesitated. Her attorney rose, but the judge told him the question was directed to the debtor. Bennett said, "I understood there were relationships among the parties." The judge's expression did not change, but I felt the air shift. The court did not decide everything in that instant. Courts rarely give you the cinematic moment you imagine. But the ruling, when it came, was devastating for Bennett. The judge dismissed her petition, finding that the filing had not been presented as a straightforward personal financial reorganization, but appeared designed to create and exploit a court-supervised sale mechanism involving a closely connected creditor. The matter was referred for potential fraud investigation. The proposed sale of her Everline interest died with the petition. I should have felt victory. Instead, I felt tired down to the bone. Outside the courtroom, Bennett approached me while our attorneys were speaking a few feet away. For a moment, I thought she might finally say she was sorry. She looked smaller than she had in the office, not physically, but somehow reduced by the loss of control. "You understand I could not keep going like we were," she said. I stared at her. "You tried to use a court to launder a power grab." Her eyes flashed. "I tried to save the company from paralysis." "No," I said. "You tried to save yourself from negotiating with me. There is a difference." She looked away first. The fraud referral did not mean Bennett was immediately marched into consequences. Real accountability is slower and less satisfying than people think. There were inquiries. There were interviews. There were letters from agencies and responses from attorneys. Some of that process remained outside my direct view because it involved Bennett personally, Harbor Point, and the people connected to it. What mattered for Everline was that the bankruptcy weapon had been taken off the table, but the partnership was over. There was no path back to trust. Even if Bennett had wanted to stay, and I do not think she truly did, I could never again sit across from her and believe that a disagreement was just a disagreement. Every document request would feel like a trap. Every strategic argument would carry the memory of Harbor Point. So we negotiated the buyout she should have asked for in the first place. This time, everything was formal, transparent, and expensive. We hired an independent valuation firm agreed to by both sides. They reviewed revenue, contracts, customer concentration, margins, growth prospects, and market comparables. Bennett's attorneys pushed for adjustments. Mine pushed back. We fought over discounts for lack of control. projected expansion value, and whether the bankruptcy mess had temporarily affected the company's risk profile. It was tedious and costly, but it was real. No shell companies, no hidden trusts, no fake emergency designed to rush a court. The final number was far higher than what Harbor Point would likely have paid in a distressed sale. That was the point. Bennett had tried to create a discount by manufacturing pressure. Once the pressure was exposed, fair market value came back into the room. The day we signed the buyout documents, Bennett and I sat at opposite ends of a long table in Priscilla's office. We did not reminisce, we did not hug. We initialed pages, reviewed wire instructions, and signed releases. When it was done, Bennett stood and said, "I hope you can run it the way you want now." There was bitterness in her voice, but also something like grief. I said, "I hope you never confuse control with ownership again." She did not answer. She left with her attorneys, and that was the last time I saw her in person. After the buyout, I had to face the company. I could not tell employees every legal detail, but they deserved honesty. I gathered the management team first, then the wider staff. I told them Bennett had exited the company after an ownership dispute, that Everline was financially stable, and that our commitments to clients, carriers, and employees were unchanged. I told them there would be governance changes, and that I would answer what I could without turning private legal matters into office gossip. Janelle, the office manager who had handed me the certified notice, came by afterward. "I knew that envelope was bad," she said. "So did I told her. I just did not know how bad. The months that followed were not glamorous. We had to reassure clients who noticed Bennett's absence. We had to shift sales responsibilities. We paused the Indianapolis plan and invested in the operations technology I had been arguing for, but I also hired a senior sales director because Bennett had not been wrong that opportunity mattered. That was one of the uncomfortable lessons. Someone can be right about a business issue and still be completely wrong in how they fight for it. I also restructured our ownership documents, even though I was the sole owner by then. Priscilla helped me build provisions that would apply if I ever brought in a partner again or issued equity to executives. Any forced transfer tied to personal financial distress would require notice, independent valuation, and review for related party involvement. Any creditor claiming rights against ownership interests would have to disclose beneficial ownership. Deadlock provisions would trigger mediation and valuation, not gamesmanship. We added language that made hidden related party transactions grounds for forced sale at a penalty. Priscilla called it a belt and suspenders approach. I called it remembering the lesson while the bruise was fresh. Cornelius closed his review with a final memo that I still keep in a locked drawer. He told me over the phone that manufactured bankruptcies used to force discounted business sales are recognized, though uncommon, forms of financial fraud. They work, he said, because bankruptcy courts are built to move quickly and efficiently through crowded dockets. Judges and trustees rely on disclosure. If no one has a reason to investigate the motives behind a debt, a bad actor can use the machinery of urgency to create leverage that would never survive in ordinary negotiation. "So if the notice had gone to someone less suspicious?" I asked. Cornelius was quiet for a second. "Then Harbor Point might have had a very good day." I thought about that for a long time. People imagine betrayal announces itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives by certified mail in language designed to make you feel too intimidated to ask basic questions. Who benefits? Why now? Who is behind this company? What happens if everyone accepts the paperwork at face value? The experience changed me. I am still collaborative, but I no longer treat trust as a substitute for verification. I do not apologize for reading documents carefully. I do not feel rude asking who owns an entity, why a transaction is structured a certain way, or whether a related party has been disclosed. A trustworthy person may be annoyed by scrutiny, but they will survive it. An untrustworthy plan often depends on your fear of seeming difficult. Sometimes listeners ask whether I miss Bennett. The honest answer is that I miss who I thought she was. I miss the early years when we ate gas station sandwiches in my car between client visits and celebrated every new account like we had won a championship. I miss the partner who could turn a skeptical prospect into a loyal customer with one conversation. But I do not miss the woman who decided that my equal ownership was an obstacle to root around instead of a right to respect. Everline survived. More than that, it became healthier. Growth slowed for 1 year, then steadied. We opened a smaller satellite operation later, with better systems and clearer financial controls. Marta became our chief financial officer. Janelle still handles certified mail, though now she jokes that anything from a court gets carried to me with both hands. Raphael says I became less trusting, but more peaceful, which sounds contradictory until you have lived through something like this. Peace does not always come from believing everyone means well. Sometimes it comes from knowing you have built systems that do not require blind faith. If I could speak to the version of myself standing in that mailroom with the bankruptcy notice shaking slightly in her hand, I would tell her this: do not let legal language scare you away from common sense. Do not let a long-time relationship make you ignore timing that feels too convenient. Do not confront before you understand, but do not stay quiet because the truth might be ugly. The paper trail exists for a reason. Follow it. Bennett thought she had found a shortcut. She believed court procedure, shell entities, and family-controlled trusts could turn a partnership dispute into a private victory. In the end, the shortcut cost her more money, her position, her reputation with me, and the company she claimed she was trying to save. All because she could not sit across the table and negotiate honestly.
That is the part I still return to. The bankruptcy filing was complicated, but the moral failure was simple. She wanted control without consent. She wanted a discount created by deception. She wanted the authority of a court without giving the court the truth. If you were in my position, holding that notice and realizing your business partner might be using the legal system to steal the company you built together, what would you have done first? Would you have confronted her immediately, or would you have stayed quiet and followed the ownership trail? Share your thoughts, because stories like this are exactly why people need to talk openly about business betrayal, hidden financial pressure, and the documents we are sometimes too trusting to question. Thank you for listening to my story. Subscribe for more true-feeling stories about trust, money, family, and the moments when women have to protect what they built. I appreciate you being here, and I hope you take care of yourself and your hard-earned peace.